I gave my family computer 1 million viruses.
Oh, me
right?
too. Yeah.
Muse was great when I was in high school. All right.
And then there was like a knockoff called FrostWire that was even worse than LimeWire.
Oh my
Man,
goodness.
this is post now.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, and
mate.
welcome to episode 21. I'm being interrupted by both of my compatriots today.
Hello.
We're discussing surround Dolby Atmos, basically spatial audio, and how there's more to sound than just left and the right. And
There's more than
It's episode
UCI to
21.
sound.
Yes.
yeah, right.
More than
There's more to sound than
the
just
eye.
what you think. So, with that being said, this is episode 21. We've made it this far. We're not quitting yet, and we've gotten through the worst of the summer season. I think at this point, we've had a lot of gigs coming up, and this will probably be posted later, but we've had a lot of gigs coming up, and we've just all been busy. I mean, I've pulled, 2 to 3 16-hour days a week the whole summer long, if not more, as well as a 40-hour a week regular job. So, anyways, enough about my life. Ben, why don't you get us started on LCR, or would you like to take a stab at this, Bryant?
Ben's got it.
Yeah.
Take it away,
I really
man.
I want to. No, I just wanted to start with the history of stereo a little bit. So it's like 100 years ago, they did this cool experiment, and there's this white paper about it. But they basically were trying to figure out how many mics and what arrangement it would take to realistically recreate an orchestra. At that time is what they did. So they didn't have any recording abilities. But, this is the beginning of audio, and it's all about the telephone world and stuff. And so they got two, almost identical looking theaters, and they were 100 miles away. So they ran the signal over telephone wire. And in one theater, they put an orchestra in there with microphones. And in the other theater, they put speakers. And they were just going one-to-one with the microphone to where the speaker was, and then they put the audience in the place with the speakers. So anyways, and they had the orchestra play, and they played it for the audience with one microphone, like mono, and a left and a right, and then a left and a center and a right. And they did these combinations, and the winner for the most realistic sound was the left, center, right, the LCR. And that is technically what stereo is. So stereo has never meant left and right or two channels. It means a stereophonic field, so it means we hear a field that's wider than mono, and it is technically LCR, and that is the way that stereo is technically created. But obviously, as things progressed, it became difficult to deliver in a LCR format, and obviously with headphones, you can't have a center speaker
Because center is just panned to the middle. Now.
Have one of those contact
like a jawbone mic.
Yeah, it's a PZM microphone, but it's a PZM speaker to vibrate
on your forehead. Yeah, that'd be great.
I actually got my hearing checked a few years ago, and that's one of the things that the audiologist did was sending sound through my
a piezo speaker.
Yeah, because your skull vibrates. It's part of your hearing process.
It's basically a way to diagnose certain things, so you can bypass the actual vibrations that go on within your ears.
Yeah,
that's why guitarists complain to me about me putting them on DIs, because they sit there and they're like, "No, it just doesn't sound the same as an amp." I'm like,
because they're not feeling the vibrations,
right? And they don't feel the vibrations, therefore it doesn't sound as good.
Yeah.
It's just different. It's not good or bad. It's just different.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the stereo image.
But so LCR is the true stereophonic, and that was the 1920s or 19-teens, maybe it was.
So this is back with wax cone.
Yeah,
we're talking back then.
This wasn't recording, so they weren't actually recording it, because the recording process, it was just they were playing it live. So the orchestra was playing live in one place, and the audience was live listening to it in the other place.
This is live sound reproduction.
Yeah. But over 100
my
miles.
world.
Yeah, over 100 miles, and over telephone wire. It's insane.
Copper cabling?
It's a super.
That's awesome.
It's a super cool white paper to read. You should totally check it out. It's super awesome.
Whoa! Now I'm like, there's like a million problems that I think of in my head as I'm thinking about this. Like,
But
not just like
were-
signal degradation over long distances and like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they were dealing with that kind of stuff because that's what, that was the world of audio, was telephone,
Right.
So, and that's why our cables are like a 1/4-inch cable is a phono cable that comes from phone patch bays and stuff like that. Anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that they still did mono for a long time because of the limitations of recording and one track recording for a long time. And then once they were able to do more than one, stereo kind of became king. And you have the phantom center, which is how you create, like Bryant was saying, you send the same signal to both speakers and it's a phantom center. It sounds like it's coming from the middle, but it's just that it's coming equally from both sides. And we talked in the last episode about our perception of sound, and how, there's time difference and level difference, with phase, with the time difference, and, and then how it goes around, filters around our head. But the panning, when you move it back and forth between two speakers, you're really only dealing with level difference, nothing else. Okay? So it's either louder on the left speaker or louder on the right or equal. And so your brain's like, oh, it's supposed to be in the middle because it's the same in both ears.
At short distances with near field monitors, that is the case.
Yeah.
As distances increase between speakers, it increases the issues with phasing and other things like that.
Yeah.
But you have to get over 50 feet of distance
Yeah.
or possibly even 30 feet. But that's an aside.
Yeah. And that's what, like the Haas effect, which we spoke of in the last one, that applies to it too. And you can actually use that to make a stronger stereo image. So when something is to the left, instead of it just being louder on the left, you can also mess with the phase so it's sooner on the left. And that's where the Haas effect with panning can make like your panning dimensions better. There's even like a lot of mixing books. There's a lot of mixers that are like, you should have at least one true stereo thing in your mix. Like if all of your mix is all just panning,
Like one side, like guitars on left, piano on right.
but it's all level panning. So you're hearing the guitars on the left because it's just coming out of that speaker. But if you have like a stereo piano or stereo overheads on your drum set, which actually has phase issues between it, like your mix sounds more natural than just like all these phase coherent things panned all over the place, because there's no phase incoherency. And so it doesn't sound natural because life is phase incoherent,
There's nowhere in natural sound where the same sound is being reproduced in two separate locations and it is exactly the same sound.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in nature. Side note, quick question. Is AM radio still mono to this day? And is FM radio actually left and right?
Yeah, FM radio is left and right. I'm pretty sure the AM radio, I don't know if it is still mono, but maybe it is.
I don't know. I have no idea. I'm going to Google that.
Question.
But anyways.
He's going to start reading Wikipedia again.
But back to the kind of like stereo image and
Brian
stuff.
keeps
Anyway,
taking us back.
trying to like keep
take
us
it
on
over.
task, guys. Come
Yeah.
on, we gotta focus. Make him lose his focus.
Put me in, coach.
So we have there's a few different setups within like stereo. So the LCR, you've got your like 2.1 setup, and anytime you see like a period after a number, well, in between two numbers, that means it's a different type of like set of speakers or a different set of something. So in this case, like a 2.1 setup is going to mean you have a stereo, not a true stereo, but you have a left and a right speaker, and then you have a subwoofer with that. So if we were to do true stereo with a subwoofer, you're looking at a 3.1 setup, left, center, right, and a sub. And then we get into the surround, which is like your 5.1 setup. So left, center, right, rear left, rear right, and then a sub. And then your 7.1, which adds in a left side and a right side.
There is in the middle of that, there's a really cool thing that happened, which was Dolby stereo, and that's where Dolby kind of got on the scene, which was left, center, right surround, just a single surround. And that was
that like a back speaker that's like behind you?
Yeah, and that was it was encoded and decoded Joe's favorite words, right? Or was that Brian's favorite word? That was what.
Probably Joe's.
I was complaining about encoding. Being a stupid
Joe
word.
was. Yeah, okay.
Because mid-side. That's why.
Yeah. Mid-side encoding, yeah. But anyways, this is kind of similar to mid-side where you take a stereo signal and you put it in Dolby Stereo and it will decode it into left, center, right, surround. You know, in the left, center, right's pretty straightforward, like an MS decoder. But then the surround is like the mid information being out of phase or something like that.
It's like they'll combine it with some other out of phase information to create a sound that would make sense sonically from another location.
Something else that I learned as well is similar to like that Dolby Stereo setup is quadraphonic sound, which essentially is that Dolby Stereo is a form of quadraphonic sound, but quadraphonic sound got really popular by the company Allen and Heath. Allen and Heath from the UK ended up kind of building consoles and stuff and kind of making that popular within a few different genres. So like The Who used quadraphonic sound, Pink Floyd used that. There's a few others within that British invasion era that got into that quadraphonic sound, but that never really ended up sticking around.
It was
So
one of
as
the biggest
far as I know,
biggest flops of the audio industry was quad. Yeah.
So as far as I know, quadraphonic sound is literally just 4 speakers: left, right, rear, right.
Correct.
That's
Yep.
it.
Yep.
That's like evenly spaced away from each other, so that you can create a balanced setting.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at some of the like original Allen and Heath boards, there is a joystick that essentially looks like an Atari. Like it legit looks like a joystick that you'd use on an Atari, and they would use that to pan things around the different all 4 speakers, and it was mainly used in a live situation to really essentially get more coverage, but then also add some depth to, I guess not depth,
some effects in the back.
Yeah, some effects in the back, or add a little bit more effect because you have more than just a left-right.
That's what they did, like, as surround sound was developing, like the consoles would have the joystick sort of thing
That's so crazy.
the joystick panner.
I mean, it makes sense though, because like you're thinking in 3-dimensional space rather than in like a linear, like a 2-dimensional kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because panning is simply like you turn it left or you turn it right, and that's essentially where it is.
Panning's kind of linear, whereas like quadraphonic and surround, so 5.1, 7.1, that gets more into like a plane instead of just linear.
In the early 2000s, because of, well, first of all, the difference between quad and the 5.1 era was that the 5.1 era, people had 5.1 systems in their homes, the stereo system. That's why quad kind of died.
That's fair.
And so in the early 2000s, they tried DVD audio was one of the things. They'd have DVDAs, which was like audio on a DVD that would go surround sound. And there was a couple other technologies and formats for surround sound audio, but it didn't really catch on because people didn't want to just sit in front of their TV with audio going. And so anyways, but like it did, for movies and all these other kind of things, like doing surround audio was awesome, but never really for music sort of thing.
Right. I mean, they don't really, like, it's not really necessary in music. Not necessary. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's cool. It's a great idea. Like, we've seen things with, like, Pink Floyd and some of the experimentation with them, even the Beatles and even later things. But it's, like, not necessary. Like, the way we experience music is not the same way that somebody experiences the sound effects in a movie and how that would tell you things.
Yeah, and at the same time, it was right as people were, like, embracing MP3s so they could just listen to music on the go. And so it's just like the whole audio industry was just like just in disbelief that like here we have like better technology, and not only can we listen to higher quality stuff, but we could do it in surround, and we're going to make this enveloping experience for you in your home. And people are like, no, we just want to listen to the low quality stereo stuff so we can use headphones that are crappy as we walk around and do everything else in our life.
Listening to an MP3 that's been encoded at 64 kilobits per second.
I mean, let's be real. Most of those MP3s were like downloaded by Kazaa or LimeWire.
LimeWire.
Yeah, dude. Like, I mean,
How to
let's
ruin
be
your
real.
family
I was
computer.
from this generation. Yeah, like I
No.
gave my family computer a million viruses.
Oh,
all
me
right?
too, yeah.
Muse was great when I was in high school. All right.
And then there was like a knockoff called FrostWire that was even worse than LimeWire.
Oh my
Oh man,
goodness.
this is post Napster revolution.
See now, now's when you pull back on the reins. That's like MP3 issues. Sorry, I opened up. But yes, now now we can. Well, and then I guess the other thing to transition, like Bryant already said that there was 7.1 and 10.1,
Right.
and they started experimenting with more formats. And the key thing here is it's just like panning with stereo. When you're mixing, you have two channels that you're sending out, and one is for the left speaker and one is for the right. And when you mix for 5.1, you have 6 channels that are sending out. You know, the 5 channels and the 0.1 for the subwoofer.
So,
And-
like, a really good way of thinking and visualizing that in your head is with a movie. Sorry, I just ate a piece of liquid.
I want to say
No,
something, but I'm biting.
No,
I'm
no, no,
chewing.
no. Here it is. But like a good way to visualize that is so like imagine like in a movie how you hear somebody walking from behind you. You would play that audio coming from like the back right speaker, maybe to like the front right speaker, and then to the center right speaker. And depending on how that sound transfers between the back speaker and the front speaker, like we would pan for a regular thing, your brain will interpret that as direction. Or something like you hear a plate crash and it's in the back room, so they played off the back left speaker. So that's what they're doing. They're just playing that sound at a certain volume with whatever sound effects from a specific speaker at that time.
Yep. Which is key to getting into what Brian
The next thing. So
Yeah.
we talked about stereo being like more of a linear type audio experience, and then when you get into surround, it's more of like a plane, like on a plane. And then when you get to more 3-dimensional audio, you're looking at like something like Dolby Atmos, or sometimes known as like spatial audio or immersive audio, and that is essentially set up to be
DTSX.
yeah.
Sorry.
So that's essentially set up to be something that's, it's descriptive. Immersive audio, you are completely immersed in it. It's supposed to feel like it's kind of unnatural sounding, but it's a really cool like experience. If you ever get a setup, like listen to like a nice like hi-fi Dolby Atmos setup, which in this case we're adding an additional period and an additional digit after that second digit. So minimum standards for Dolby Atmos, you're looking at a 7.1 setup, but then you also have some vertical speakers, and that's going to be your .4. So depending on which spec you're looking at, you're either looking at 7.1.4 minimum spec or 7.1.6.
Now, some of those ceiling speakers actually can be up throws. So, like, they're speakers that are just angled towards the ceiling. And because the sound goes to the ceiling and then bounces down, they can actually angle that. And you hear it as if it's coming from the ceiling because of the angle and everything.
And I know we're like
That's
not
cool.
we're
I
not
didn't
like
know that.
name I know we're like not name dropping stuff, but there's Sennheiser recently came out with a kind of like a quote unquote at home setup. I say at home with the fingers, the quote finger thingies, because because it you're looking at like it's a hi-fi setup, and I don't think that the like $2,500 price range is really a quote unquote at home setup, but it gives you essentially I believe it's supposed to give you like a 9.1.4 feel. So instead of 7.1, 9.4, yeah, well, 9.1.4. And the way that it does that, those vertical speakers, it does exactly what Joe was saying, where it has some vertical speakers that fire up and uses your room, essentially uses your room to create a faux Dolby Atmos without actually having a quote-unquote legit Dolby Atmos setup.
So let's actually talk about the differences between Atmos and surround sound, because there's a very important key difference here that doesn't exist in surround sound that does exist in Atmos. So one of the reasons why Atmos is different than just because you could just say, oh, well, it's just surround sound. You're just adding more speakers in different planes of existence. Dolby Atmos is a little bit more involved in that. So with surround sound, you're choosing which speakers you are literally sending sound to. So like if I want something to sound like it's coming from behind you, I play it in the 2 rear speakers. That's how I make it sound like it's coming from there. Atmos is a little bit more programming and computer intensive or complicated because you can still do that where you just want to play something from the back speakers or from the front channel or from the center or whatever channel you want to play from. But Atmos and a lot of these more spatial audio things are designed where they can do these things called audio objects is the concept that they talk about. So in this case, you're literally taking a sound and you're putting it in a 3-dimensional space, and then that will be decoded, which makes more sense in this context. So then the Atmos system will say, oh, it's going to be over here to my front right. It will then send all of the audio to the specific speakers that need to hear that audio with whatever effects. So if you wanted it to sound like it was straight behind you, you could literally like think about like dragging and putting a sound effect, like a crashing plate behind you. You could literally drag it and drop it to behind you and it would sound like that. But you don't have to go through the trouble of patching it to each individual speaker and thinking through it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that crazy? Am I going crazy?
No, I think that you explained it well. It's because Dolby Atmos is basically a mixer, and it's a program, like you said, you're controlling, you're saying it's in this area in the space. And then it takes that mixer and it says, hey, now we're in a 7.1.4 space. So now, because of the programming, we need to send this to this speaker and this to that. Now we're in a 10.2.4.6,
whatever, I don't know.
So we need to send this to this and this to this. And so it's scalable. And that's the cool thing, because if you had mixed it for 5.1, then you go to a 7.1 space, and it's like, oh, well, what do we send to those other speakers?
Yeah.
And there's another conflict with that as well. So with Atmos, without Atmos, so with just a regular surround system, depending on the distances of each speaker, it will change the nature of how that sounds. So we know about the Haas effect, right? Now, with small locations like in your home theater, that's not as big of an issue because you're talking 5 to 10 feet. But if we equate 1 foot to about 1.1 millisecond, that means you're having a distance of about 5 milliseconds from your listening point to whatever speaker's on the other side if you're dead center. But let's say you're sitting to the right a little bit on that couch. Now you're 3 milliseconds off, and that's now 7 milliseconds off. And so it's not really perceptible in the sense that it's gonna sound really off because of the Haas effect. You're gonna still kind of hear them happening at roughly the same amount of time, but your psychoacoustics that you're gonna experience are still gonna be a little bit odd. Not to mention the fact that, let's say your right and your left speaker in the surround setting might not be exactly lined up, or like maybe they didn't know how to set up a surround sound system, and so they're like off by 5 or 10 feet. That changes the whole experience for surround sound. Atmos is a little bit more stable in these kinds of instances because you have more.
Well, Atmos is also a lot more involved. There's a lot of math, and you have to calculate your angles and everything when you're setting up an Atmos system. And so, like, if you think about like people that are currently using Atmos that are outside of the film industry, like looking at like Bob Clearmountain and what he's doing, because basically Bob Clearmountain is doing a bunch of label work, remixing music for different artists that are signed to different labels, but he's mixing them in Atmos. And so he's got his 7.1.4 set up. And
that's so crazy.
It's interesting kind of hearing him talk about like mixing music in Atmos, and just kind of like, well, how do you even like begin with that? And one of the things that he noticed was, well, if you put like the reverb towards the back, it sounds really cool. Or if you put the delay or the reverb up on the vertical speakers, it ends up like sounding a lot more natural. And you would think that within mixing, since you have, if you're mixing Atmos and Pro Tools, you're limited to, I think it's like 128 objects or something. If you're on like the Pro Tools Flex subscription,
Atmos is limited to 128 objects. DTS-X is infinite a number of audio objects. That's the big
with Pro
thing.
Tools.
But
with the DAW is going to be limited to what it can send to it.
Whatever.
But yeah.
I forgot where I was going, but anyway, you'd think that like mixing it, you're like, oh man, I could do like all these cool like chase effects. Like imagine like sending this object all the way around like this vertical thing, and the way that Bob Clearmountain is currently mixing And sorry to like name drop, and now we're like, I'm not trying to like idolize him, but he's the only person
He's
that I know
doing
off the
this,
top of my mind that is currently mixing in Atmos. I know there's other people that are as well, but
I think Andrew Shep's talked about it too.
probably.
Anyways,
But he's mainly just keeping things a little bit stagnant in his mixes, doing a little bit of motion, and you're like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something that if you haven't had the opportunity to yet, if you ever get the opportunity to take that opportunity to listen to like music in an Atmos setup, it's just a completely different listening environment. It's completely immersive.
It's funny because this is just, it's like cyclical.
Yeah.
This is exactly what happened in the early 2000s as they're like, yeah, we need to do DVD audio and they have these surround sound mixes, and they went through the process of making things super crazy all around. And they're like, no, let's be more subtle and put like more just reverb in the back. And it's like, it sounds so cool. But it's just, it's going to be the same issue. It's like inconvenient for people. I think it has to have a video element for people to look at. And it'll be like super cool music videos.
The cool thing though about Atmos is that a lot of these people, like there's somebody that I work with that is doing some Atmos mixing, and he will do 90% of the work in binaural, because he's just he's like constantly working. He's one of those workaholics, and so if he's like at home, not in his studio, he will be prepping mixes, getting them ready binaurally. And then he'll do like 90% of the work that way, and then he will go put it over into his Atmos system, check it on Atmos, and do the like last 10% in an actual Atmos setup.
I mean, how different is that from mixing in mono and then putting it into the stereo field? It's the same concept.
Exactly.
You're mixing in a format you're familiar with.
That's kind of a different, a good thing to discuss that we didn't really put on our list of things that kind of applies to this, and we've kind of hit on, is that like they've been doing this for a while, like the sound bars, where they're using psychoacoustics, and like we've talked about in the last episode,
room reflections.
Yeah, and it's like they're using those level time difference and the filtering that happens when things come behind your ear to kind of, put stuff in front of you, but then say, hey, this is going to sound like it's coming off the back wall because it's filtered like your ear would filter it. And that's what the binaural thing would do too. So you can mix it like that, and it's putting that kind of effect on it, and then you can go listen to it in the Atmos system and hear it. But that's how the 3D audio works for VR and moving things around. And that's obviously moving objects around so that when you move your head, they change where they're at. But
that gets into like Apple Music's spatial audio, which is I believe that's what they do for the.
Yeah, and that's actually making your headphones sound like a 3-dimensional.
So
space.
here's the thing. All of this stuff is really cool. Ambisonics, Dolby Atmos, 5.1, 7.1, all of this stuff, super cool. But I kind of go back to like what you were saying earlier, Ben, how we're like, we swing one way, but then the reality is everyone goes for the most economical solution. Because people have more money now,
economical and convenient. Yeah.
Both of those things. But the point is, like, even today, like, I know this because part of it's like live sound and it kind of ruined me some way, but it's like people are just as simple. They're like, just give me a speaker. Just any old speaker will do. And they're not thinking about placement. They're not thinking about sound. They're just thinking, can I hear my music? And I'm saying this not to be derisive. Like most people, like you said, like with MP3s, they were horrible. Like maybe if you were lucky, they were like 96K or like, you know what I'm saying? Like they were not good quality. And I know, I remember what it sounded like. I didn't forget what the early 2000s, the early aughts were like. But the problem we're going to run into with this is Dolby Atmos in most of these surround sound systems are only going to exist. Atmos will probably only exist in high fidelity listening environments, places like Sweetwater or places like movie theaters and maybe other like fancy, science museums.
Yeah, museums.
Blackbird Studios has has like a whole studio. I think it's like Studio C that they set up.
Yeah.
Well, and definitely in museums, like there's really
Yeah.
cool interactive experiences, and so
Like IMAX, for example.
Yeah.
There's like some cool like interactive things with IMAX, and I believe IMAX is now
Or, like-
incorporating Atmos.
But it's like the Sennheiser Orpheus headphones. They're $55,000 headphones, and I can tell you this: no expense was spared. They like gold traces everything, you name it. Even the freaking amplifier has like granite, like hand engraved granite on this thing, right? With like hand built tube drive. And you know why Sennheiser did that? I'll tell you why. Because there's some rich dude out there who will buy it, and so that Sennheiser can say we did it. Those are the two reasons why. So, like, for the vast majority of people, they're just going to be happy with their headphones on their ears. And I think what you were saying about Apple's spatial music and spatial audio, even with, like, VR, I know because I have a VR headset. I just put in my IEMs. I'm not going to go through the trouble of setting up 5.1 and then having to figure out how to get the VR headset to encode that. And, like, that's a whole, like, technical... And I like technical stuff. And I don't want to deal with that. And if I don't want to deal with that, I can guarantee you that no normal dude is going to want to go through all that work to set up those things. They're going to hire someone to do it who does that for their only job.
well, and that's how many times have you walked into somebody's house and you go into their home theater and they've got left, center, right, surround, all these speakers lined up.
All 5 of them just right along the front. Oh, dude, I had to help my
what?
brother-in-law set up his. And yeah, no, it's...
It's
My
just no
brother's-
sound coming from the TV. Yeah.
My brother in light, please set your surround up the correct way.
No, and I helped them out. But it was just... Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, we can't really...
Yes, I mean that's just something that's interesting. Like I said, it's cyclical.
It's cool.
And we have the quadraphonic, we have the DVD audio with 5.1, and now we have, the Dolby Atmos. And
I'll be real. Yeah, go
I
on.
was just going to say, I will say that from a consumer standpoint, I don't think that in a movie situation, like a home theater situation like this, or like, I guess a lot of people have dual purpose home theaters like myself. It's
Yeah.
also the quote unquote family room. And, we have, I guess, technically we could have a surround setup in ours because we do have like a 5.1 setup, but we're currently just running a LCR and a sub, so 3.1. But,
That's fair.
it's consumer grade. It was like $200 for the whole thing, and it's good enough for us to like watch movies and feel like we're immersed in the film and stuff. But there's that visual aspect with it. Whereas from the standpoint of like mixing music and like listening to music and that kind of a thing, it's like, no, I don't care. I want some bass, from that, and I want my at least like. I don't even care if I have a stereo set up when I'm listening to music.
You want your Harman curve with your
That-
boosted highs, your boosted lows, cut mids.
I want just a square wave where it's like here's the lows and then just like gets to the mids like completely down.
I will.
Like
Okay,
it's
to
going through
kind
a
of
Boss DS1.
to kind of wrap things.
You guitarists will understand that.
Oh gosh,
the pedal
Okay.
that everybody
Oh.
has or
Yeah,
has
yeah.
owned at one point. Yes,
Every
every
owned that.
guitarist has owned that pedal
pretty
at one
much.
But how many times have you owned that pedal though?
Yeah,
Like 7 or 8. No,
I
I'm
was
just
kind of debating on buying one again. I used to have one.
So, okay, I want to actually wrap this up because we kind of have talked around a little bit about ambisonics, and I actually personally think that ambisonics has probably a little bit more application because it's cheaper to implement than 5.1 and 7.1 in general. Because the whole thing about ambisonics, so we talked about how mid-side is basically they use like an encoding pattern to create those sounds. Ambisonics is the similar kind of concept of mid-side, but taken with more microphones. So mid-side, you use 2 microphones. Ambisonics, they'll have like, if you've seen those little like, what is it, tetrahedral,
I think
tetrahedral mics.
four's
where
like
they-
the minimum, I think.
minimum. Yeah, four's
Yeah.
the minimum.
But there's
like
some mics
13, 16, 20.
yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's
It's
one that recently
4,
came
9,
out
16.
that like I think it had 8 or 10 on it, and then the only connection that it had was an Ethernet connection because it's
Yeah.
sending the audio via Dante.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Usually, when they get more than 4 or 6, they've got to send. They got to do the conversion inside. There was one I checked
Right.
out at NAMM. I think it had 16 or 18, and it had just a USB connection because it had its own software with it. And it's like, you're not going to have an 18-channel interface, and we're not going to, send out the copper to send out, all these signals.
But essentially, the way that
yeah.
it works, though, the way that an ambisonic microphone works is, so with mid-side, you have the center one, and then you have the figure 8 pattern or the binaural sort of head microphone that's in the middle, right? That's your mid, that's your side. Sorry,
yeah.
Your mid is your cardioid pointed straight forward to the source, and then you have your mid, which is a figure 8 pattern. Then you would duplicate that mid, and then phase invert it, and then pan them hard to the sides, and then bring up the volumes of those hard pan side microphones to match, to kind of create this left, center, right sound, right? Am I right?
Yeah,
that's how you do
bring
it
up
for
the
mid-side?
mid. You bring up the mid.
Right, bring up the mid. My bad.
The sides
just
of
the
figure
mid.
eight.
The sides need to be the same. The
Right.
phase inverted, they need to be the same level. But
So-
the mid can adjust.
As you add
I
more
have to keep you
microphones,
on track.
as you add more microphones to this equation, that encoding process becomes more and more complicated because now you're using individual variations. Like if you have a 4 microphone, like that tetrahedral mic setup, where they basically have one pointed here, one pointed
Fancy
here, one
words.
pointed there, one pointed here, or whatever. They then do the similar thing, but now you add another, like 2 microphones to that mix. So now you're taking that sound and you're doing that same kind of math where you're like taking the sides and then you're phase inverting one, panning them to the left and right, and then bringing the centers up. But they're doing that from like 3-dimensional space. And so if you're using this microphone here as your center for this source, essentially, you're using the other 3 microphones to kind of balance that, which is cool, complicated, but they have software and stuff to do all the decoding for you, so you don't have to think about that.
Well, and that was the cool thing. The one I checked out at NAMM, the guy let me use the software, and you've got, things are happening. It's noisy at NAMM. And my wife was there, like, walking around. But the idea is that you can, based on where somebody is around that microphone, you can go in the software and move around your view and be like, oh, here is this person talking. And now it's done all that math to focus on that one point in this 3-dimensional space. And then you could mix that. So the cool thing is his selling point was like, you just put this in the middle of like an acoustic ensemble and you record them. And then now you can actually pick out each different instrument and have the ability to like individually mix it.
Yeah.
So it's super cool stuff, but it's not, and everybody thinks that kind of recording would equate to the 3D audio that we were just talking about, but it doesn't, because it's a whole
Not really.
it's a whole different kind of math,
Because, like, if you think about it,
Yeah.
But if
it
you
really
think
is the
about it
opposite.
from this perspective, you're only really using one mic position to capture all of the audio in a 360 degree and for the vertically and horizontally to pick up all of that audio from one set of microphones in one single position. The thing with the ambisonics that doesn't work, that all of these other systems do a little bit better, is you're not actually handling things like traversal of space. You're literally a single point microphone hanging with these like tetrahedral microphones. So if you move forward, you are going to hear things differently than if you were 2 feet backwards. I mean, that's just what it is. And you can use a bunch of those, but that's still not really accurate. Like, because this position here to this position here, if that's on a guitar or on a certain instrument, that sound like an inch different, especially if you're close miking, is totally different tonally. And so that's one of the big weaknesses. Comb filter, all of that stuff. But like that's one of the reasons, that's one of the big weaknesses of ambisonics.
Yes.
And ambisonic microphones as they try to do their ASMR routines. I told you no ASMR. Anyways.
Episode of Guys with No Lives.
Hi. Hey, hi. How's it going? Okay, so
breathe. Joe's trying to be serious.
Anyway, should we wrap this up?
yeah, we should
Yeah.
wrap this up.
But it is interesting to just not downplay what Joe was saying. It's true. It's there's a lot of interesting issues with all of these, and there's good things for different situations, and
Yeah.
there's limitations to any of them.
Yeah. It's not good or bad, it's just different. And some are better at some things and others are not as good as other things. The question is what has the best combinations to get a good result. But spatial sound, spatial audio, It's something that only the rich, elite audio engineers will ever have a chance to work in. Ho, 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 ho. As for me and my house, I'm just going to stick with LCR or satellite throws. Like,
as for me and my
left,
house,
right?
I'm gonna.
Yeah.
As for me and my house, mix good.
good luck. Don't mix bad. So mix good.
Mix good in stereo.